Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. Well, in this day and age, electronic gadgets have become an integral part of our lives. So we buy different kinds of devices with the latest technology, use them for a while, and then when it breaks down, what do? We have two choices. We either pay unreasonably high prices to have the manufacturer fix the device, or more likely, and something which I assume most of us do, is to discard the old one and buy another one. For manufacturers, either of these options is a win-win case because high-priced repairs as well as new sales mean more profits. However, this trend is now changing in several parts of the world. Apple recently announced that consumers will have the right to purchase spare components of their products. Google also announced plans to expand access to the parts and tools that consumers need to fix their own devices. Now, these announcements by big tech companies follow widespread calls for right-to-repair reforms. In fact, right-to-repair bills have slowly been working their way through legislatures in different countries. So in Perspective today, we will analyze what is the right to repair, how does it help consumers like you and me, and how will these reforms help in also protecting the environment. To discuss these aspects and much more on the program, I'm pleased to welcome an eminent panel on the program who are joining us virtually. I have with me Professor G.S. Bajpai, Vice Chancellor, Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law. I'm also pleased to welcome on the show Mr. Vinod Sharma, Chairman, National ICTE Manufacturing Committee, CII, and Dr. Sunil Pandey, Director, Environment and Waste Management, TERI. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this edition of Perspective on Sansad TV. Professor Bajpai, let me begin the program today with you. In fact, for the benefit of our viewers, let's first try and understand the rationale behind right to repair.
Yeah, thank you. So, as you have already stated that in this age of consumerism, a lot of electronic goods and gadgets are purchased. However, the clauses of all the manufacturing companies and the big companies are such where they do not provide enough space for the consumers to choose. Consumers to choose the manner the gadgets could be fixed. And in fact, the post-sale services is the sole jurisdictions of these companies. So clauses are created in a manner which restricts the choices of the consumer. However, the Consumer Act in India, 2019, gives freedom to choose to the consumer. But the clauses of these companies are such that the consumers are left with no choice but to go by the mandate of those companies to get the things repaired in the manner the companies want them. So they cannot go to the independent repairing person or a company, or they cannot try to get them fixed through a third party. So I think this right is actually systematically being killed by design. And it is actually causing huge loss to the basic rights that have been granted to the consumers in the Consumers Act. However, the situation, as you said, is gaining ground in terms of actually becoming right to repair a very, very fundamental, important rights. But the companies actually are not willing much to provide these rights to the however, there are interacting factors that the companies also have their own say. They say that our trademark, our copyright, laws are such where we cannot provide these consumer the access for the purpose of their security, for the purpose of their privacy clauses or their confidentiality clauses.
Absolutely. In fact, for the manufacturer's perspective, Professor, I'll come back to you, but for the manufacturer's perspective, let me get in Mr. Sharma here. So globally, Mr. Sharma, what we are now seeing is the right to repair is gaining momentum. In fact, some countries have also adopted policies, enacted legislations that now recognize right to repair. What is the manufacturer's perspective? What are the concerns that they had been raising all these years? And even now, there is, of course, resistance.
You're absolutely right, Tina. The need for us to be able to repair on the one hand, the economic opportunity as a country that we have because of the kind of skill base, the talent base that we have at reasonably economical prices. We feel in the industry that our whole repairing industry, not just for India, but for the world, can actually be made to function in India. And our estimates are to reach an economic value of about $1 billion per annum should be something that is very, very plausible. What stops us? Why are manufacturers, I think as Professor Bajpai alluded already a little bit, the issue about if ideally all the chargers in our homes, whether they charge a cell phone or chargers for all our laptops and tablets, should be a uniform charger, like we have the sockets in our wall, right? The reason that does not happen, partly of course was economical, but partly is also scientific, innovative, because each manufacturer is trying to bring to the table something that is a little more innovative than what somebody else is doing. Having said that, I completely agree that there is absolutely no reason why these cannot be repaired. A company may want to extend its economic value, in which case they could themselves take on the responsibility of taking back these items, repairing and putting it back in the market as second-hand goods, or allowing some third party to do that. But I completely agree that the refusal to do any repair whatsoever is today not justifiable socially and environmentally. And of course, the loss of opportunity that comes with it. However, the way the current legislation have been put out, the extended producer's responsibility are so ominous and sometimes so impractical. So if you tell me today that what I sold to you 5 years ago, I need to, as a brand, need to acquire all of that back. Unfortunately, the only practical thing that happens is a lot of greenwashing. So large brands will buy out some of these certificates that claim to be actually finding this in the supply chains or in the scrap yards, and then show them as repaired. So I think there is a lot of room for what I would call a dialogue with the industry to understand what can be the policies, in which way the manufacturers can also become a stakeholders in this very, very timely journey that we have for what I may loosely call a circular economy.
Okay. So what are these options? How can the manufacturers be also made a party in these discussions? And there can be a right balance is something that we will discuss in the course of the program. But coming to you, Dr. Pandey, for your perspective, and because we are seeing in this age of technology, we are all surrounded by gadgets. But the fact is that when they wear out, when they become obsolete, they all become electronic waste. A lot of us are not even aware of how to discard them efficiently. So that, of course, is leading to a lot of e-waste in our country. Globally, we are reeling under this e-waste management crisis. So from that perspective, how welcoming is this move to actually give the consumers the right to repair and continue using the old devices by getting them just repaired instead of discarding and buying a new one? How good is it for the environment?
Thanks, Tina. I'll begin with a small perspective. Though not formally, but we always have been a repairing economy. Situation actually became more problematic when the electronic items started getting introduced in the market with more and more miniaturization and more design patents and more design complexities, where repairing was difficult. But if you see from the environmental perspective, as you said, the e-waste is one of the fastest growing waste stream in the world globally. Just because many of the products have a very short lifetime, either because of hardware support or because of software upgradation. So right to repair not only extends life of these products, but before it gives them second life or third life before they get into waste stream. So from that perspective, it's very important that right to repair is a part of the manufacturing strategy. And there were initiatives initially. Sometimes back, there were phone manufacturers in Europe which were looking at modular designs, where some part, if it's not functional, or for some reason, if you need to upgrade a part, you can easily change that and without actually affecting the whole phone. You don't need to discard the entire phone just for the sake of our part not functioning or part needing upgradation in terms of either memory or camera. But we need to kind of take this initiative on a mission mode. And right to repair is important element, of course, in extending the life of the product. And it has to be taken up closely with the manufacturers on how they can introduce this in their products.
Okay, Professor Bajpai, coming back to you to understand how far will these commitments go. So now we are seeing there are several big tech giants who have given now the consumer the right to choose if they want their device to be repaired. But looking at the monopolistic practices that they have in the market, one, how far will these commitments go? And also, we often see that these companies who hold monopolies devise mechanisms that it becomes practically impossible for the repair industry to actually repair their devices. So ultimately, it's a web in which the consumers will be trapped. Even if you want your device to be repaired, the third-party agencies will find it extremely difficult to do so.
So, I mean, actually,
Professor Bajpai.
I'm sorry?
Professor Bajpai, that question is for you.
Okay.
Yes.
So I would say that there is a whole regime of intellectual property provisions which are invoked by these companies to continue with their practices. And if you can see, for instance, Section 29(1) of the Trademarks Act, whereby when repair services are involved, which are commercial in nature, so they said that the consumers cannot be given this right, otherwise it would result into the infringement of trademark. Similarly, the end user license agreement, the provisions, contractual provisions are made in a manner which impose certain restrictions on the consumer. Those are the restrictions of transfer, restrictions of warranty, restrictions of reverse engineering. So these clauses are invoked, and there is one more section of Patent Act, Section 140, which provides a lot of protection to these companies based on which they continue to have their monopoly in terms of keeping the repairing part with the companies only. So consumers are left with no choice. However, if you allow me to say, in the recent past, the courts, especially the Competition Commission of India, considered some of these things as anti-competitive practices. And they have ruled out that the Consumer Act is fully, and if you see the, Tekla Corporation case of Delhi High Court. So Delhi High Court said there can be no contractual restrictions that limits or impedes the rights of consumer in using a product following its sale. And similarly, in the very important case of Sanjeev Nirvani, so Delhi High Court said that even after a warranty period, the company is mandated to provide spare parts and consumable items like batteries for the operation of laptop. And lastly, the case of Shamsher Kataria is very important, which has almost conferred the right to repair by saying that these are the anti-competitive practices involved in the manifestation of certain practices while denying the right to the consumer. And this judgment has very clearly gave this right to the consumers that they should be given this opportunity to choose their repairers. And hence these anti-competitive practices, including these IP laws, should not become a barrier in actualizing some of these rights, and I'm sure a law or a bill which would be provided, these judgment would work in the background very significantly. So this is the emerging jurisprudence as far as right to repair is concerned, because ultimately these rights have to be conferred legally, because ethical or moral convictions are not so strong in the market that would guide to these companies to have these things provided to the consumers.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Sharma, so will the right to repair reforms have any impact on the product warranties is one question that's arisen when we talk about this debate. And the second concern has been on the medical technology field, because when we talk about electronic devices, we can say we've expanded, given the consumers the right to choose, have a cost-effective way. But when it comes to life-saving technology, can it be unregulated and unchecked?
Yeah, I think you've raised two very, very pertinent points. Let's remember one thing. Often in these discussions, I find that the manufacturers are painted as with one brush of being villains of the piece. Now, that's not true, because there are all types of manufacturers and they find all types of market practices. Absolutely. But the one common defining factor amongst all manufacturers, especially brands, is that they respond very well to market needs. And what I mean by that is today the market in India, unfortunately, so let's not look at something as complex as a mobile phone, which is a very, very complex electronic circuit, is not really easy to repair, by by a person in a village or a small town. So let's not make a mistake there. But there are simpler electronics like a LED light bulb. And this used to be a compact fluorescent lamp 3 years ago. And at that point of time, we had this huge problem, hazard of mercury. Because if you crack this open, in the open, you would get mercury poison. You had the chances of leaching this into the earth. And hence, that was not advised. Now, in a simple circuit like an LED, it is very possible that a person can be trained quite simply. The circuits, more or less, there are those 5 or 6 very simple circuits running across the industry, and these can be repaired quite well. But here, unfortunately, for whatever reasons, right or wrong, the market and the manufacturers are driven by one thing, which is low cost. We all want to buy a lamp cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And what has happened is that lights, bulbs, which used to be giving us a warranty of 2 years, have now come down to a warranty of 6 months. This is where I think standards kick in. And they say, you know what, in India, we will not allow anybody who has less than 1 year or 2 years or whatever seemed reasonable. Number one. Number two, the manufacturers in their defense will always say, you can always regulate us because we make in India or we sell in India. But what about the traders and very cheap goods coming from across the border from our friendly neighbor? And some of them being traded by our own people. And those are coming into the market with illicit names, wrong brands, wrong marking, etc. And we are held responsible for it. So it's a little bit, it's a complex situation, needs a very holistic view. But in my personal opinion, and in CII, I chair this national committee. I also had the privilege of chairing a committee within MeitY where we got in some of the stakeholders together along with manufacturers. And I was very pleased to see that, the level of the dialogue. So even the people that we may normally hold as villains, I was very happy to see that their very senior executives were totally in a mood and in the spirit to be able to get to this. However, they had some, so a light bulb is not the same as a mobile phone. Warranties can mean different things to different people. And you mentioned medical equipment. Now, if I allow this medical equipment to be repaired, and if there is somebody who has who's delivered a shock or a fatality or a disability, now which manufacturer is going to take the responsibility for this? Absolutely. So there is no one size fits all. In some areas, we would hugely encourage skilling at the village level so that simple equipment, set-top boxes, dish TV, your television apparatus, small things like that we can repair. Modems can be repaired to some extent. However, the moment you go to medical equipment, we would say, no. This is not something that we would like anybody to open up. It must go back to the manufacturer and only then be repaired. So I would be saying that, manufacturers, if they are taken as a part of this dialogue, they are made also part of the solution. I am sure that we can set an example because do remember that in India, we have a huge historical, cultural advantage. We don't like to throw things. We love to use the same phone, give it to our driver who gives it to his children, etc. On the one hand, and on the second hand, the mobile phone, for example, has become a device which is now educational, which has many other implications. So as electronics enters our lives in more ways than we can imagine, there is no doubt in our minds that the right to repair is genuinely a right that must be available to all our citizens.
Absolutely,
However,
what we generally see is, and something that you've said it rightly, is low cost often impacts quality. And when we talk about such technology, especially pertaining to medical field, there has to be some kind of credibility. The buck has to stop somewhere, and that is why it's important that one size fit all approach is not possible. Dr. Pandey, I'll come to you for one final comment, but before that, let me go back to Professor Bajpai and understand how strong is the momentum in India, Professor Bajpai? We are seeing it's gained significant ground in America, where President Biden signed an executive order last year. Even in several European countries, there is Australia, where there is an example. But if we try and look at the India perspective, how is the momentum of right to repair movement in India?
So essentially, the India is capturing the developments which are happening in other jurisdictions. So especially if you look at the Australia, the UK, the US, actually, they have given a clear conferment of right to repair to the consumers. So it has been now legally provided, and sooner or later it will become the part of Consumer Protection Act 2019 in India. So because the saying goes that if you can't fix it, you don't own it. So right to choose is something which is very inherent. Of course, the operation of this right would definitely come with certain practical limitations, which may vary, as Mr. Vinod Sharma was saying, according to the technology. But I suppose this movement will now start gaining ground because the consumer organizations are raising their voices with regard to, or in India particularly, I'd like to point out this is far more important because apart from the legality of the right involved or the environmental hazards involved in this process, there is a third dimension that India is a very different country where the repairing market is so huge and a lot of people earn their livelihood indulging in this kind of practices. So in a way, their entire work has gone, vanished. So by providing these things legally, they will continue to have some limited options in terms of repairing certain gaps. So I would say that the jurisprudence which is emerging from various court decisions now, if these matters are taken to the court, I would say, though it looks little odd, I say more and more people should go to the court and get the directions, even for the legislature to prepare a bill, specifying the rights, conditions, applicability, options, and all those things. Once it becomes a formal document, as a policy document, because right to repair has to be accepted as a state policy in the country, then it would become institutionalized in our practice. I'm sure that the future is very, very bright for this right to become a reality in this country.
Absolutely. And as Mr. Sharma pointed out, historically, Indians have this emotive value attached to all of the products. So we would not like to part ways with something that our grandfather or father has used. So that has a win-win situation even for the environment, Dr. Pandey. So a positive impact, of course, in that sense, but the sooner the better, because it will also help us realize our climate goals. And we will move a step further towards meeting the Sustainable Development Goal target as well. So towards achieving these very, very ambitious targets that India has set for itself, and the time is very less, what do you suggest should be the way forward?
Yes, I mean, as suggested by Professor Bajpai, I mean, we can't remain insulated. Like climate action, the movement which is going global, India and similar countries cannot remain insulated, and most of the manufacturers of electronic materials are global players. So, I mean, if they take action in one country, they have to take action in another country as well, in terms of accepting the right to repair.
Absolutely. Mr. Sharma, you wanted to add something? Please go ahead.
Yeah, just one suggestion. Along with the right to repair, we have a bigger right, which is a right to choose as a consumer, which is based on right to information. So I think the first thing we need to do is the product packaging must tell me whether this product gives me the right to repair. Secondly, in today's environment, if I may add, which is diverging a little bit from our point today, is how much of this is made in India? If as a citizen, I'm worried about national security, if I'm worried about jobs, if I'm worried about Atmanirbhar Bharat, can I have a star rating which says this is more made in India than this is less made in India, this is a traded product out of India, etc., etc. So similarly on environmental, how does it rank on an environmental scale? We are doing that today in a very limited way on energy efficiency. We need to do this on 2 or 3 other scales, and one could be the environment, or in fact the whole ESG responsibility. Am I a more responsible manufacturer than somebody else? And let these manufacturers then fight it out in this very large market based on consumer choice.
Absolutely. That is something that France has been doing. In fact, I was reading up and I came across that France has asked companies to grade themselves from 0 to 10 and inform the consumer whether the product can be repaired or not. And I think that is something that should be made available in India as well. A wonderful suggestion coming in from our panel. So time is running out. With that, I'll have to wrap up the discussion. Thank you once again, gentlemen, for joining me on the program today, sharing your thoughts, your perspective with us and our viewers. It was a pleasure having you on this edition of Perspective. So that's it from us on this edition of Perspective. Thank you very much to all our viewers as well for their time. See you again tomorrow. Thank you once again.